Hello, my name's Nadine Liddy. I'm the National Manager for MYAN, the Multicultural Youth Advocacy Network, and we're co-hosting today's meeting looking at young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds and disability. And we're co-hosting with NEDA. Over to you, Dom.
Hi, my name is Dominic Golding, and I'm the Policy and Project Officer around the Royal Commission. NEDA stands for National Ethnic Disabilities Alliance. We are a disability people's organisation governed and staffed by people from migrant backgrounds and with disability. And we're an advisory group, systemic advocacy for around the Royal Commission. So welcome and thank you. Welcome to today's national meeting. We're looking at young people from refugee and migrant background with a disability. I'd like to introduce our two Auslan not speakers, but they're Auslan interpreters, my bad. Chelsea and Philip. They will be swapping over every so often, so we'll allow for time for that too, so during our proceedings. Just so you know that I'm a person who has two disabilities. I have a hearing impairment and cerebral palsy. So if anything is not clear, please put it in the chat and I'll do my best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dom. Terrific. And for those of you who don't know who MYAN is, we're the national peak body representing the rights and interests of young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds. We're based out of Victoria and have partners in the states and territories across Australia. And we're really, really excited to be co-hosting with NEDA. So thank you, Dom. I'd also like to introduce a welcome Shenna, who is our illustrator, our visual documenter for today. It's lovely to have you part of this meeting, Shenna. And I'll do some introductions with our other speakers. I might actually just do that very quickly right up front. We have Grace Edward from Queensland and Cindy Liu from Victoria. And also Jess, and sorry, they're the two, Grace and Cindy, we're going to hear from very specifically as part of our agenda today as the first part of the meeting. But I'd also like to welcome Jess and Shauna from the Royal Commission. Thank you, Jess and Shauna. Okay. And I'd also like to begin, before we formally get underway, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands throughout Australia that we're all joining this meeting today. And we'd like to acknowledge their continuing connections to land, sea and community. We certainly work towards reconciliation with and self-determination for the First Peoples of Australia. And I'd like to pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who might be present with us today. And certainly for me, I'm meeting today from the Wadawurrung land in southwest Victoria.
And I'm talking from the Ngunnawal people of ACT and New South Wales, regional New South Wales.
And Dom, I'm going to hand over to you for some context setting and a bit of a run through over the agenda. And as is probably obvious to you all, Dom and I will be tag teaming, co-chairing today's meeting.
Welcome. And it's great to have so many faces here today. We are a little bit, I can only speak for myself, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by how many responses we've received for this. So we have over 300 RSVPs. We've got people, representatives across the disability sector, youth, settlement, community services, local councils, sports organisations, education, TAFE, COLD communities and advocacy. So COLD is culturally and linguistically diverse. Social housing, health and mental health, legal, and of course, and the police, and of course MYAN's partner organizations as well. NEDA and MYAN are co-hosting today's meeting in the context of the Royal Commission. We will hear from two young people, Grace and Cindy, as well as representatives from the Royal Commission, Jess and Shauna. The purpose of the meeting is to hear from and raise awareness about people's lived experiences of disability. Young people, aged 12 to 24, from refugee and migrant backgrounds, to better understand which organizations are working with this group of young people to provide support, to identify what the gaps may be, and to help inform MYAN and NEDA's submission to the Royal Commission. You will have received an agenda, and we'll start the conversation with youth perspectives. We'll get straight to it. From Cindy and Grace, and representatives later, and I shall introduce formally people from the Royal Commission. We'd like to move on to some group discussion and questions listed in the agenda. And Nadine, would you like to go through that?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Those questions we'll come back to, but there are 4 key questions we're keen to explore today. What supports are available for young people from CAL backgrounds with a disability? What are the barriers to accessing support faced by young people, those with lived experience with a disability or carers of those with a disability? What are some of the gaps in service delivery and what is needed to address these gaps? So we'd like to end with a bit of a focus on what some solutions might be. We will be sharing Shanna's visual notes after the meeting. We will also be sharing a recording of the meeting. And we will be working together, NEDA and MYAN, in preparation on a submission to the Royal Commission. So just to be clear, we'll be sharing some visual notes and the recording, but we won't be sharing a comprehensive document with minutes from the meeting. And I might also just add that we've intentionally chosen this format on Zoom for this meeting rather than a webinar format, because we did want a level of interaction with those of you who are joining as participants. We are wanting to hear from you in terms of some discussion around those questions that we have posed. So we've intentionally gone with this, this particular setting on Zoom rather than a webinar format, because we think it's a little bit more interactive, and certainly we can all scroll through the screens to see who's online and the organisations that you're representing. So let's get cracking. I'd like to introduce Grace and Cindy. Grace is well known to MYAN. She was previously a youth ambassador for MYAN a couple of years ago and has been really active in our youth advocacy and leadership work. And Grace is a really passionate advocate for refugee and migrant youth rights, particularly in the creative arts space. And we'll hear a little bit more about your perspectives in a moment, Grace. And Cindy Liu is from YDAS in Victoria, the Youth Disability Advocacy Service, I think, which is a youth-led organisation in Victoria. And I know you're studying at the moment, so you're a student, Cindy, at the moment, and we'll get to hear a little bit more about what your life looks like, and in particular your work with YDAS in a moment. And we will also hear from Shauna and Jess about the Royal Commission after we've had some Q&A with Grace and Cindy. So Cindy, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about YDAS and how you came to be a youth disability advocate?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Cindy. Well, to answer this question, I kind of started quite young as a self-advocate when I was very young, mainly because as a second generation migrant, my parents kind of didn't have time or didn't have the language skills to kind of navigate the public health sector and different disability support systems. So I started really young, and then I kind of fell into high level needs with adults. And I did that for a little bit. I really enjoyed my time there, but the kind of things that I was doing didn't really speak to what I wanted to do or the things that I've experienced. And then I kind of moved over to YDAS and had a more youth specific focus, which I've really, really enjoyed. And why I enjoyed it is I just found the youth sector spoke to what I have experienced as a young person. Um, the 12 to 25 window is such a transformative period of time. And I just thought the things that I saw in high level needs with adults as something that could have been supported as a young person as more of a upstream preventative measures. Yeah, and that's me.
And I think when we were chatting last week in prep for today's meeting, Cindy, you talked really eloquently about the importance of a youth focus and sort of a Venn diagram. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Definitely. Yeah, so I'm kind of new to the CALD community and advocacy surrounding that, but I am super interested in getting involved in this sector, mainly because I have a migrant background, and some supports and issues within, say, the youth sector or the disability sector or the CALD community. If you think of it as like a Venn diagram, some areas of each bubble might not accurately or effectively support a young person within that little intersection. So yeah, there are definitely complexities to this demographic, which unfortunately hasn't been discussed or explored to any great extent until this great meeting.
Thanks, Cindy. Great. And Grace, can you tell us a little bit about yourself there in Southeast Queensland and what you'd like to add?
I am only just, I guess, getting into the advocacy space for disability or people with disability, as I am one. I think because I'm from a CAL background, it's been very difficult culturally to talk about disability. And I guess just because of the stigma that comes with that, and because of how people with disabilities are treated in our cultures and in our families. So it's been something that's been very difficult for life, living with a disability. And it's exactly what Cindy just said about the complexities and those intersections that, and people who fall through the gaps because they are within those intersections. Yeah, I think that's the.
Grace, can you say a little bit more about the journey for you in becoming a youth disability advocate or an advocate around young people with disabilities?
Yeah, for me, the journey is still beginning. And personally, I just had to get to a place where I was comfortable or am comfortable talking about my disability firstly, and not worrying too much about the stigma that comes with it, especially from family or community, because there are a lot of young people who are hidden and have disabilities and aren't in a place where they can talk about it or talk about the type of help or support they need publicly. So it's very important for someone like me from a CAL background, from an African background, to talk about disability and the issues that come with it, or the obstacles that we face in trying to seek help or support.
Great, thank you, Grace. And I might throw this question to both of you, picking up on your point, Grace, about this group of young people perhaps being a hidden group or a little bit invisible. Can you either of you say a little bit more about why that might be, what's going on there?
I think, especially coming from a non-Western culture, we different communities view disability in a very different non-Western way, and I think a lot of the time we kind of want to mold ourselves to the Western system and then get lost within that, as well as the fact that because CALD communities view disability in such different and varied ways, we kind of deal with our disability in a very different way. For my experience, I was kind of like squirreled away and wasn't kind of empowered to talk about my disabilities, and it was like repressed inside me for such a long time, and it took a growth and a personal journey to accept that I have a disability and I am within this community that doesn't talk about disability.
I think for me, with family and community, it's that the way disability is viewed sometimes is that, oh, that family has been cursed, or that family had done something wrong to someone and therefore the wrong is coming back on them, sort of like karma. So in that sense, most of the time, that person in the family who has a disability is hidden. The family will do the best they can to hide that person or hide that disability. It's not talked about at home, it's not talked about anywhere, and it's not encouraged to be talked about because it's seen as a shameful thing. And I'm only just speaking generally, this may not apply to every family, but from my experience, that's what I have seen. And so therefore, for a young person or for someone in a family going through a disability, it's hard to come to a point where they feel empowered enough or comfortable enough with their disability to even talk about it. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Grace. So Cindy, given that you are in a specific role as a youth disability advocate, can you talk a little bit more about what that meant in your family context? What did your parents or other family members think about that? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, a really great question. And going off what Grace said earlier, within my family, we still don't talk about my disability, mainly because I'm very comfortable outside of home talking about my disabilities with other people with disabilities or people outside of my CALD community. However, within my family, I find it so difficult to discuss it with my parents because that precedent has never been set, or the boundaries have never been pushed. So my kind of work has always been within the disability community, not in a wider sense and not in a CALD community sense, which is why I'm really excited to kind of push myself to a place where that I'm not so comfortable, but I really think the need is there for young people voices with disabilities in CALD communities to be heard, and changing that kind of family dynamic. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Cindy. So I'm going to follow up on a question because I think this is a very interesting area, particularly around advocacy and how we in the sector might understand advocacy, and you do. What did your parents think of this concept of advocacy, or your family members? Was it something they were familiar with and supportive of?
No, not to speak illy of my family, but it is kind of the candid truth. They kind of saw it as like let's help pity or help in a like a service support capacity instead of an empowerment capacity.
Great, thanks, Cindy. Grace, did you want to add anything there? Because I'm going to move on to a related but different question. Okay, well, my next question picks up on your point, Grace, about a hidden group. So for both of you, do you think young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds, from CAL backgrounds, are receiving the support that they need, those with disabilities? Do you think they're receiving the support that they need?
Cindy, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I would say no, but is it ever yes? I think I spoke about it in my little intro, but I became a self-advocate at a very young age. I remember in primary school telling my support workers, like, oh, I need this, mainly because my parents were, one, really busy with work, and two, they didn't really have the language skills to communicate what I needed. And in that sense, it is very common within the CALD community that a lot of the responsibility does fall on the younger generation. And in that, I had no support. I had to kind of like wiggle my way around the health system, the disability sector. And it was so overwhelming, even as a person of 21 years, looking back, I was like, that's overwhelming. And even now it's overwhelming because there is no kind of culturally effective communication. Kind of like, for example, there was a time in my life I needed a support worker, and how my family kind of viewed disability as like a punishment for something maybe that bad they did, and they had to live out their punishment. And convincing my parents to allow a support worker into their home was a massive debate. And it didn't help that the agency that the support worker came from didn't communicate that very well. And it was all up to me to say, this is what I need, parents. I know you're working 10 hours a day, and it's just sensible. And yeah, I would say no, we don't have the appropriate supports.
Grace, do you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, to follow up on that, agreed with everything Cindy has said. I think also it's because when I came to Australia, that was in 2003, and the support I got was the medical side of things. So finding a specialist who could help me with the disability that I had. And my dad would be the one to go to appointments with me. And we became really close then because I felt like that was in some way him showing me that it's okay to talk about my disability with him, because he was a parent that went with me to those appointments. But then I realized soon that that wasn't the case. In terms of medical support, I think in finding the right people or the right type of support to help the person with that disability that's there, but it comes to the emotional support that's missing from family, and or just even being introduced to a group of other young people who have disabilities, and having those people to talk to and sharing, oh, I'm struggling with this, how did you overcome that? Just like-minded people who are going through a similar experience who you can talk to. And I remember when we were having our discussion last week with you and Cindy and myself, and just having the conversation with Cindy and realizing how many similarities we had in the experiences that we've gone through. It was very refreshing to talk to someone else who had a disability. And I think we need more of that for young people and or older.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We empower each other. We always it's because we are such an intersection of demographics. We are scattered, and it kind of feels like we're alone in our experience. And I loved talking with you, Grace.
Me too.
Yeah, we did talk about the need for more platforms for networking between young people like yourselves. And, you know, certainly you're, I don't know about scattered, Cindy, but certainly it might feel scattered sometimes for you. But I think, you know, young people from CALD backgrounds with disabilities and navigating all of those, you know, demands of life as adolescents, and that really significant developmental stage that you referred to, Cindy, navigating through that with multiple issues that you're dealing with, you know, pressures or otherwise from family, you know, your aspirations around education and employment and career pathways, you know, your health and well-being, connections with peers. There's a lot going on, and in amongst all of that is navigating what it means to have a disability, what that looks like in your cultural context with your peers outside of your cultural context. Yeah, I think there's a lot going on. And can you talk a little bit more about what your disability means for cultural expression and identity? I know we chatted a little bit about that last week too. Grace, do you want to go first?
Yeah, we were talking about traditional customs and rites of passages that people who have disabilities may not be able to participate in because they have disabilities, and what that means for them in their cultural development. Yeah, I think, I don't know if I've experienced that personally, because growing up in Australia at such a young age, and also my disability is not one that hinders me as much from participating in a lot of those cultural customs and traditions. So yeah, but it is something that would be very difficult to navigate.
Yeah, going off what Grace says, I haven't personally experienced anything very extreme in terms of cultural, my place in my culture being unstable because of my disability, but I have experienced it kind of like bubbling under the surface, kind of like I spoke about this with Grace and Nadine. I come from a Chinese and Southeast Asian background, and in kind of like funeral rites, there's a lot of kneeling and sitting on the ground, which I can't do, and no one during these proceedings, no one within my community kind of pointed it out, but it was a point of difference for me, and it made me feel kind of other within the community that I was kind of born into.
Great, thank you, Cindy. And I'm just looking at the time. I might just ask you for any final sort of comments that you'd like to make, knowing that we really value your contribution to this meeting as young people with lived experiences. We really value your willingness to share what are very personal experiences for you. And this is really setting the context for the rest of the meeting. Is there anything else you'd like to flag, and knowing that we have a lot of people online who are working in the policy area and also working in service delivery?
I just kind of want to touch on that a lot of families within the CALD community have a kind of a rocky relationship with the kind of like Western healthcare system, and how that relates to my experience is that I have a lot of pressure from my parents to do well, because they see themselves as my caretakers, and they're always worried about what happens to you when I am gone, and they don't kind of understand or trust that one, that I can take care of myself, and two, that government supports will, or like community supports will get me by if they weren't there.
I think also another thing to I guess, remember is that for a lot of these families, that this might be the first time that in their family line they are looking after someone with a disability. So it's something completely new. And what I've learned through my work is that with families or with parenting, most of the time, you parent as your parent, as through the examples that your parents before you showed you. So if there was no example of looking after someone with a disability and you as first-time parents are going through this, it's very difficult. And I think there needs to be space in the system for support for parents and patience with parents as well, in going through the journey of supporting their young person with a disability. And yeah, just more space needs to be created for young people or anybody with a disability to find a support group that they can go to, because it's much easier to talk to other people who have disabilities like you rather than people who don't. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Grace and Cindy. Thanks for your wonderful perspectives. And we really appreciate you sharing that in such a large group. We know that's not always an easy task, but some really great perspectives that are food for thought, certainly for this meeting and beyond. And I think some of the key things are around intersectionality, but also seeing you as empowering and empowered young people who can engage in self-advocacy and who are willing to do so, and navigating really complex spaces. And I think the other thing I just want to say is that we are talking about young people from refugee and migrant communities and from CALD backgrounds, but certainly some of the issues you raise are across all cultures. So I really want to make that point really explicitly. And you guys were very sensitive about your own cultural backgrounds, but you know, some of the stigma and the understandings of having a child with a disability are consistent across all cultures. So I just want to be really explicit about that. Thank you, Grace and Cindy. And for all those who have joined us today, there will be some Q&A time at the end of the meeting. So if you've got questions for Cindy and Grace, they're going to stick around for our discussion today, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask them some questions towards the end. Thanks, guys. And I'm going to hand over to you, Dom.
Thanks, Grace and Cindy. That was really awesome. That's good to hear some really anecdotal, personal things around your lived experience. Now, it's kind of interesting around some of the stuff that you talked about is actually structural and systemic. So NEDA and the Royal Commission have been doing work around how to make the Royal Commission more accessible for people from cold and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And of course, we know that violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation occurs across all different sectors, from education to as you stated, and at school, in your home, and in new workplaces. So I'm going to hand over to Jessica Boyle and Shauna McGuire, and they're going to talk about their role with the Royal Commission and their outreach work with cold communities. So thank you.
Hi, thanks so much, Dominic, and thank you, Cindy and Grace, for your insights. It's really amazing to see how empowered you are, and thanks for your honesty. So I'm Jessica Boyle. I'm a Community Engagement Officer at the Disabilities Commission, and with me I have Shauna. She is the Assistant Director of Community Engagement. So before we start today, I'd also like to do an acknowledgement. The Disability Royal Commission carries out its work on the traditional lands of First Nations people. We're currently in Brisbane on the Jagera and Turrbal lands. So we pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we acknowledge the ongoing endurance and resilience of First Nations people, including First Nations people with a disability. We carry out our work so that we may contribute to a more just and inclusive Australia. So basically, Shauna and myself are going to give a brief update today on some of the work of the Disability Royal Commission. We're more than happy to answer any questions at the end. If you don't get a chance, we will also share our contact details, so please feel free to reach out. So what is the Royal Commission? Basically, the Royal Commission was set up by the Australian government to investigate a specific problem. In this case, the problem is that people with a disability are particularly vulnerable and face a range of barriers to living independently, whether it's finding a job, going to university, getting appropriate housing or transport, and accessing, as Cindy and Grace alluded to, culturally appropriate care. For people with a disability from migrant and refugee communities, these barriers can be even greater. So what do we actually do? The role of the Royal Commission is to gather stories from people in the community and share ideas on how things can be better and improved. And these stories will help us better understand the issues affecting people with a disability and also guide our work. At the end of the Royal Commission, we will write a report that will be sent to the Prime Minister of Australia. And this report will outline what the problems are and make recommendations about how to improve things for people with a disability, their families and communities.
So to date, we've received over 1,200 stories, or we call them submissions, but the experiences of the called community and specifically young people from a refugee and migrant background aren't being as heard as much as we'd like them to be. And these voices are really important to us because, as we've already heard today, there are significant gaps and, you know, a sense of invisibility that might sit around being a young person from a called background. So it's really important for us to acknowledge the hard work that Dominic and Nadine have put in and their teams have put in to put this on today. And thank you so much to Grace and Cindy for being so honest and open in sharing your stories. We very much appreciate your insights. So the main way that we collect stories is through something that's called a submission. So a submission can take a number of forms. It could be something that's written down in either an email or there's a form on the website, or it could be a video or an audio recording or an artwork, and it can also be in your first language, so it doesn't have to be in English. And if you're a person with a disability or you care for someone with a disability, you have a friend or a family member who has a disability and there's a story that you would like to share, then that's something that we would love to hear from you. So the kinds of stories that we're interested in specifically, the formal name of the Royal Commission, it's quite long. It's the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability. So we know that these terms can be quite confronting, but that they also mean different things to different people. So we're not working with a set definition of, you know, violence must take these particular forms. So some examples of, and we want to hear, about what's most important to you. So that might be sharing your personal experiences as a person with disability or someone who is close to someone with a disability, or how you think things could be different in the future, as well as your hopes for the future. What would you like to see and achieve? So some stories we've heard so far include stories of abuse. This might be students who've been bullied at school because of their disability or excluded from certain activities. Stories of exploitation, which may be people who are university educated but have trouble finding appropriate employment because workplaces aren't willing to make those workplaces accessible for them, or people with disability not being paid appropriately for work that they're doing. There are also stories of potential neglect, and that falls under problems that people have accessing culturally appropriate care. And that might include access to interpreters so they can communicate properly. And this includes things that happen around the NDIS, or the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And we've also lately, obviously, because we're all living through the pandemic, we've heard a lot of stories about the gaps that people are falling through and the experiences that they're having during the time of COVID, and how that has that ripple effect into families and communities, as well as the person with disability themselves.
So these are just, I guess, some examples that may help you decide whether or not you'd like to make a submission. If you would like to get more information, you can go to our website where you'll find information. There's also a video. The video is currently in English and Auslan, but translations will be available soon in Mandarin, Vietnamese, Arabic, Hindi, and Tagalog. We'll share those links with you shortly on the Zoom page, and MYAN will also be sending them out. We'd also love to hear any ideas you have about ways that people may be able to share their stories. We are planning to hold specific events with young people, and we are looking into innovative ways that we can reach out to the community. So if you've got any ideas, please feel free to share them with us. So there are two take-home messages from our update today. The first is that the Disability Royal Commission exists and is taking place now, and the migrant and refugee community are a really important voice that we would like to hear from. So please share what you've heard today with your colleagues, any of your friends, family, and community. The second point we'd love you to remember is that while MYAN and NEDA are both making a submission to the Royal Commission, and this will capture part of the migrant and refugee experience, and we'd also love to hear individual stories as well. So if you have a story that you would like to share, we'd really encourage you to make a submission. There's no closing date for this, and there are also supports available if you did want to share your story. So there's free counselling support, and there's also free legal advice if you've got questions around confidentiality. I will send the links now on Zoom, and yeah, just thank you so much again for your time. I'll hand back over to Dominic and to Nadine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess and Shauna. That was a great introduction to, a very brief introduction into the complex work of the Disability Royal Commission. I'd just like to highlight the fact that it is really important for people from migrant and refugee background and asylum seeker background with a disability to put in a submission about your experiences, whether that is a difficult experience, and because in some ways it'll help, as Cindy and Grace highlighted, around stigma and access to support. And I think it needs to be acknowledged that people with disability, despite the fact that most of the disability sector has done a lot of, broken a lot of new ground around stigma and social exclusion, we can demonstrate that a lot more work needs to be done within the COLD community. So with that, I'd like to state that we're moving forward into the opening of the 300 plus people to answer some of our questions. And just as a reminder, if you'd like to speak, can you please pop your name and into your chat box, and also to indicate that you would like to speak. Nadine, after the questions, my bad, Nadine will indicate to whom would like to answer these particular questions. So I'd like to say, moving on with these questions, can you also put on your video, because as a person who is hearing impaired, and also for the benefit of our Auslan interpreters too. So the first question is, what support is available for young people from COLD background with a disability? Anyone?
Thanks, Dom. Yeah, we're opening that up to the group. Looks like we have about 220 participants. So we're really just opening that up to the group. We'll see how we go with this approach. But as Dom said, if you'd like to respond to that question, just pop your name in the chat box and we'll move through that. And if we don't have any takers on any of the questions, then we will move through to the next one. Okay, so Fiona, thanks Fiona from your story. You'd like to respond. Can you pop your video on? And if you're not speaking, could you just turn your video off just so we can clearly see who is speaking? So
Thanks.
over to you, Fiona. Yeah.
Thanks, Nadine. I hope everyone can see me now and hear me okay. In response to the questions about the types of supports that are available for people with disability from the called communities, and in particular young people, I wanted to follow up on that question, and also in reference to the presentation that the Disability Royal Commission just gave. So I will preface it by saying the support I'm going to explain now is specific to the Disability Royal Commission. So what we offer is a free and independent legal support service. And what that entails is information about the Disability Royal Commission, how to engage with it, things like what Jessica has just been explaining about the different ways to tell your stories, which are submissions and private sessions and all sorts of other factors. And then specifically, we can also provide tailored support to the individual's needs around any concerns that they may have when they share their story with the Disability Royal Commission. And some of the concerns can be things like, and commonly what we're hearing is a fear of retribution or being disadvantaged if they tell their story to the Disability Royal Commission, and perhaps it involves a service provider or someone that they're in contact with, and they're fearful that there will be repercussions or punishment if they are found out for that, or even perhaps even an employer, for example. So we can provide some advice about that, about the different options available to help you keep safe in telling that story to the Disability Royal Commission. We can also provide information if, for example, somebody, as part of sharing their story with the Disability Royal Commission, wants to name a name of an organisation, and the things to take into consideration when doing that. And that can be if they have a no clause or no name arrangement with a contract existing, those sorts of things. But I guess to, the other thing we do is if people want to share their story with the Disability Royal Commission through a submission, we can help with referrals to advocates to support someone to write that story, or, as the Disability Royal Commission said, present that story in a different format. We can also help people if they want to prepare for a private session with the Disability Royal Commission and feel supported to do that. So that's just some outlines of what we do. But as I said at the beginning, that's specifically about the Disability Royal Commission. Our service will only exist for that purpose. But I just thought I'd use that opportunity to let everybody know about it, and following on logically from that discussion as well.
You're perfect, Fiona. Thank you. Can I just clarify if this is a national service or where you're based?
Yes, very good question. Good point. Thanks, Nadine. Yes, national service, funded for the whole period of the Royal Commission. We have staff based in all of the states and territories around Australia. And in fact, one of the staff members is here today with me, Carla, who is based in South Australia. They provide a unique perspective from that particular state and territory, and can provide that direct support and advice to a client who wants to use our service, as well as they help promote our service and get the word out amongst that community, which of course would involve the COLD community. Yeah, I think that answers the question. The only other thing I could just want to flag to you about the unique aspect about our service is we are funded and delivered through the National Legal Aid Service, and also through the National Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Legal Service. So we have a staff member who is a dedicated person, who is an Aboriginal person in each state and territory, as well as a person who is not. And that's specifically to support that group who also has significant barriers in terms of telling their story to the Disability Royal Commission, and we need to make sure their voice gets heard. The only other final point I would say is that we recognise that there are some real challenges about getting the word out to the CALD disability community and young people, those two areas in particular. We also have similar stats to the Disability Royal Commission, is that we are not hearing those voices. Those members from those communities are not contacting us for support services. So we are working on developing specific approaches to better reach those communities. And I will be happy to put in my name and contacts. I would love it if anybody wants to reach out to me after the meeting with ideas about how to better tailor that message and reach the communities around Australia so people benefit from it. We're here to support people. We want to make sure people know about it so that they can use it if they do need that legal support.
Great, thank you, Fiona. And yes, please do. There's pop your contacts or a contact for your service in the chat box. Someone has asked for that, so fabulous. Yep, thanks, Fiona. There's a couple of people with their hands up. Najla Turk, if you'd like to respond, and then there's a couple of others. And you can pop your video on, please. Najla, yes.
Sorry, I just had a bit of problems. Can you see me now?
We can, thank you.
Oh, perfect. So it's unmuted and video, perfect. Look, my name is Najla Turk, and I'm extremely passionate about disability. Insofar as I'm a carer in the space, but also I'm a cultural ambassador working with a large disability service provider called Sunnyfield. They have over 84 hubs in New South Wales, and the region that I'm working in is the southwest and western Sydney, which is a high cold community. So coming from a cold background, working in this space, advocating myself, I'm fully aware of the barriers. And thank you, Cindy. And Grace, was it? Cindy and Grace, yeah, it resonates. And yeah, sadly, there are lots of challenges. But I wanted to just highlight, so at Sunnyfield, working in this space, we have over 65 youth from cold backgrounds in southwest and western Sydney. And what they've done to support youth is create an app, Skills for Life app, and it's been translated in 3 languages. So it's Arabic, Mandarin, as well as Vietnamese. So that's what they've done to give back to the community and to support youth. Also, they've hired CALD support workers, culturally and linguistically diverse support workers, which obviously it helps. And in my capacity, I speak with community and trying to break down the barriers and the stigma. And you know, it could be a while before shifts occur, but I think every little bit, every webinar, every conversation, everything that we're doing is working towards creating change. So I just wanted to put myself out there. I'm working on a larger scale, advocating for disability in CALD community. And as I said, Sunnyfield are doing an amazing job in working with youth. If you have any questions, I'll put my email on the bottom. Feel free to give me a call. And I'm currently putting together an online package to raise awareness on how to engage, communicate, break down stigmas and barriers. So that's
fabulous.
All from me.
Thanks, Najla. That's fantastic. And highlighting some of the specific supports for young people. Thank you. The other person that has their hand up is Mel Robinson. If you could pop your video on, and you've got the floor.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can see me. I'm using my phone today, so holding it up. Hello, so I'm a lawyer who works for the Legal Services Commission of South Australia, so that's legal aid. There's a version of legal aid in every state and territory, but I'm specifically talking from the South Australian version down here, based in Adelaide, but we have offices, all over South Australia. I just wanted to quickly just give a quick shout out specifically to, in South Australia, we have something called the Legal Helpline, which is a 1300 number that people can call to get on-the-spot legal advice during the daytime between 9 and 4:30 p.m. Monday to Friday. That service that Legal Helpline is actually a service that is also replicated and available in all the other legal aid commissions across the country. Now, it's different to what Fiona was talking about before with the Your Story Disability Legal Support. That service is really for people who want to tell their story to the Disability Royal Commission. The legal helplines at the Legal Services Commission of South Australia and at the different legal aids are about helping people get started with sorting out legal problems and making that contact for legal assistance. What's really important in South Australia is we will book and pay for interpreters for free if you need one. You can also call us through the telephone interpreting service and ask for them to call us and have a three-way conversation. Our lawyers have all had disability awareness training. And also we have lots and lots and lots of different resources in different community languages on our website, including videos involving community members where they're talking about sharing stories about getting in contact for legal advice, and booklets and resources called Law for You. And all the different legal aid commissions as well have a really big legal resource that's been around for many years called What's the Law? Which is about learning the law, learning about Australian laws in a really simple way while also learning English. And all those videos and resources are also available on our website. So what I'll do is I won't just circulate the Legal Services Commission email address, Legal Services Commission phone numbers and but I'll also, of South Australia's phone numbers and websites, I'll also send around the national websites and legal call numbers as well. So thanks for listening in.
Thank you, Mel, and you can pop that in the chat box. And I can see that a few people have responded to this question, what sorts of supports are available, by popping some info in the chat box. So if you haven't already, for those of you on the line today, do check out the chat box. Over to you, Dom, for the next question.
Thank you. Thank you for that information from the previous announcement speakers. I'd just like to state that a lot of things around the COLD community, around legal support and understanding your legal rights can be very confronting and very scary. And also because a lot of us from migrant and refugee background and the asylum seeker background have had bad experiences with the justice system, the kangaroo courts that may have occurred that promote persecution and exploit torture and trauma. So we need to be mindful that there needs to be a lot of work in overcoming those barriers so that we can feel confident to tell our story. So the question is following on that what are the barriers to support faced by young people? So what are the barriers faced by young people and those with a lived experience or carers for those with a disability in the COLD background, in the COLD communities? So yes, so that's the next question.
Thank you, Dom. So once again, we're opening that up to anyone who'd like to respond. You can either pop your hand and certainly Cindy and Grace, you had highlighted some of those. I might just throw to you guys. Did you want to add anything here to some of your earlier comments and or respond to that first question?
Kind of, in my experience, when seeking out support, the kind of biggest barrier is that the fact that I am part of the COLD community is like a afterthought or like a back burner priority, and sometimes support services or even young people with disabilities don't kind of consciously understand how big of big part it is of their kind of supports and kind of like how effective their supports can play out.
Yep, thanks, Cindy. And Grace?
We talked about this last time when we met on last week, but I think one of the other things is that, especially reflecting on my own journey, is that I, for a very long time, didn't feel like seeking help for disability, especially like in terms of financial support, or even telling an employer that I had a disability so I could get some more support in that sense. And that was mostly because I felt like my disability is not as bad as how other people's are. So I felt as if that support could be given to someone else, but that's just me measuring myself. And sometimes I would get into situations where I did need that extra support, and I wouldn't seek it because I would feel guilty over it. So I think support in that sense for young people as well needs to be provided. That's another barrier. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Grace. And, you know, picking up on both your comments, I think what we're hearing loud and clear from you guys is that, again, the intersection of being a young person from a CAL background with a disability, and that those sort of three components or elements in the Venn diagram, as you described, Cindy, really actually play out in your lived experience, you know, day to day, week to week, and that the sort of confluence of those three parts of your lives can play out in being a barrier to accessing supports that may be designed for adults that don't necessarily take into account the youth experience or the youth perspectives and experiences and needs, or the CALD, or they may be designed around you know, the CALD community and don't necessarily take into account the experiences of young people. And somewhere in between that, some services may not take into account the cultural context that you're living in as well. And what that can translate to are barriers to accessing what I think is a need for really targeted and tailored support to your particular contexts. It doesn't look like we have anyone who's wanting to specifically respond.
Sorry. Bridget speaking from Women with Disabilities Victoria. I put it in the chat. Sorry, I wasn't
sorry,
sure.
Bridget. Go right ahead. Terrific.
So my name's Bridget and I work with Women with Disabilities Victoria. And specifically, I'm a Women's Empowerment Officer working with youth. And we find that also some of the barriers that young people with disability from a CALD background have is also further compounded by gender. So obviously within society, but from a perspective of people with disabilities or from a CALD background, there's a different idea of gender roles. So things like it might be your role is to get married and have children specifically, but then if you are a person with a disability, you shouldn't be having children. And so there's real kind of conflicting ideas around, you know, what you should be as a woman based on someone from a CALD background or with a disability. And also being quite young, whether if you have a disability, whether you're ready to have sex ed or talk about particular healthcare issues because you're not ready for that. And we also see like the disparities in gender around certain things. Women with disabilities get paid, underemployed or unemployed at a much greater rate compared to women without disability or men with disabilities. And so we kind of, the more layers of intersectionality you add, kind of the compounding of the disadvantages there are. Another really good example is access to healthcare and sexual education, those sorts of things, the ideas of forced sterilisation or using forced contraception those are other complexities as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bridget, and thanks for squeezing in. My apologies, I overlooked you in the chat box. That's
no worries.
Yeah, really critical points. And again, I think you've reinforced the importance of taking an intersectionality lens here. And you know, they're both experiences that can create marginalisation, but I think certainly what we're hearing from Grace and Cindy is there are also strengths and capabilities in all of these experiences that we really need to be recognising and building on. We have a couple of other people who wanted to speak, Marcia and then Rochelle. So we might throw to Marcia. Terrific. Great. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to add a little bit on. I'm working for the Australian Migrant Resource Centre in South Australia, and we've been working with CALD communities for over 40 years, but more so in the last couple of years engaged in a lot more work in terms of people with disabilities, and that's including young people. So I just wanted to echo everything that Cindy and Grace have been through. We've seen the same experiences of young people here working with CALD communities. And, you know, some of the barriers that we talk about are around, you know, we see that the NDIS is having like individualized, very focused on the person plans, not including the rest of the family. The young people usually depend a lot on the understanding of the family as well in terms of their disabilities, similarly to what Grace and Cindy have been talking about and other speakers. So without including the whole family in discussions and what is needed, that's where we're seeing a whole lot of gaps and barriers. In terms of that. There is also a lack of services specifically for CALD people to engage in. You know, we see a lot of specialized services for people with autism, intellectual disability and various disabilities, but we see that people from CALD communities don't quite fit in those groups. So there's not a whole lot of services available that are culturally aware and are safe for CALD people to access. And therefore that aids further the isolation and adds to the barriers for those communities. Again, as I said, for young people, being able to have their own platforms where they feel comfortable, creating those safe environments where they feel comfortable to talk and discuss. Like now, you know, this is a great, you know, a chance what we're seeing at this meeting for Grace and Cindy to be able to speak up, but we need to create these opportunities a lot more for a lot more young people to engage. And I've seen also some questions through the chat room of different providers saying, how do we engage with these communities to provide that awareness? Well, I can say that us and across different states, there's a lot of settlement providers who work directly with CALD communities. Please, you know, work closely with them because they have the inroads to all the communities that we work with. And also in a little bit of a response quickly to the Royal Commission, and there's a lack of submissions from the CALD communities and young people. Well, there is a need for a bit of a relationship and trust and rapport for them to be able to engage and provide that feedback, because often Royal Commission is seen as something, you know, big and daunting and coming, you know, from a government perspective. Quite a lot of background information that we've got from CALD communities. They don't trust the government because of the experiences they've had in their own country. So there is a need of more work to link with settlement providers to make sure that their voices are heard. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marcia. I'm going to I'm conscious of the time. I've got a couple of other questions, although of course they do overlap, but I'll just throw to Rochelle from Starts. If you can turn your video on. Terrific.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi. Thanks for finding my hand. It's always hard managing online. I'm from Starts in New South Wales. A specialist torture trauma service for refugees and asylum seekers. I particularly wanted to raise refugee and asylum seekers because I think there are other barriers, and I love that we've had Cindy and Grace telling us what some of these barriers are because they are very real. I think for our refugee and asylum seekers, they're amplified because they've often come into the country with no reports, no information about their disability, and from a cultural background that might see admitting that you have a disability or a person with a disability previously might have stopped you coming in the country. Now that the government is letting people with disability into the country, families may still be not wanting to kind of show how difficult or how challenging the particular disability is. And so getting the right sort of reports, and obviously we have wonderful refugee health who are helping with that, and our settlement providers, but there is a sort of minimisation often of how difficult or how challenging some of the issues are. And that doesn't just happen in the refugee community, but our CAL community health practitioners often will say, they'll go to someone who speaks their language and they'll say, oh no, they'll grow out of it or they'll be okay. So that's, I guess, one of those systemic type barriers that we're talking about. The other one I wanted to raise very, very quickly, because I am aware of time, is asylum seekers can't access NDIS, and many asylum seekers, not all, some depending on what visa, can't access Medicare either. So that creates some very, very challenging barriers to actually getting services, and then impacts on abilities to engage in education or engage in work and other areas of community participation. Thank
Great,
you.
thanks. Yeah, thank you, Rochelle, highlighting the particular barriers for a particular cohort within that very broad CALD population group. We've kind of covered question 3, which is what are the gaps in service delivery, I think, from some of the responses. And I think we've begun to look at what's needed to address these issues. I just want to throw to Grace and Cindy, is there anything you wanted to add in response to any of the comments that have been raised? Otherwise, we'll just move on to the next question.
I think it was Nisria. I second everything she said. It struck to me. Yeah, definitely the NDIS isn't very culturally aware. There is such an emphasis on the individual and not on the community, which CALD communities are so entrenched in, and a lot of their supports do come from the community they're within. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to something that was mentioned about the difficulties for women with disabilities, because that is something that is very real within CALD communities, especially with the addition of dowry within our cultures, and how women are valued, or their dowry is much more because if they've studied, if they're beautiful, and having a disability and being a woman from a CALD background with a disability, that is sort of seen as a devaluing factor towards your dowry. And that's another very big conversation as well that I think is often missed.
Well, thanks for putting it on the agenda, Grace. Fantastic. All right, I'm going to move us to the last question before we open up to a bit of Q&A. And I should say that some on the call today have popped in responses to those questions in the chat box. So do once again scroll through the chat box. So our last question is what do we think is needed to address these issues and some of the issues raised today? In terms of support needs for young people from CALD backgrounds with disabilities, addressing some of those service gaps. You can either pop your name in the chat box or put your hand up.
Can I quickly respond to this?
Yes, you absolutely can, Cindy.
I think one of the major steps we need to take is making sure there is cultural diversity within the disability advocacy space. In my experience within it, it is kind of run by cis white men and women, probably equally in my experience. Yeah, and that kind of gives rise to you're advocating for someone, but that kind of rapport sometimes doesn't match up, because if the person you're representing or advocating for is of a CALD background and you potentially don't really understand where their background is from, advocating for them might be difficult, especially if it's in a very specific cultural context.
Thanks, Cindy. Grace, did you want to add?
I think going in terms of engagement, it's important to identify existing community structures within our communities in order to engage with the right people, and identifying key leaders that are, I guess, respected or highly valued by their community to help you identify those young people with disabilities that need support. But also going in, I think someone asked a question earlier in the chat box about how can services go in without making their clients feel like, oh, they're pitying them. And I think it's about building on existing knowledge. It's not coming in and being the expert. People with disabilities know their disabilities best and what type of support they need. They don't need to be told what type of support they need. So it's about asking questions rather than making assumptions, and including the family, in fact, the whole community, because we are collective. We come from collective societies and cultures. So it's important that the whole family or the whole community unit is part of the support for that person.
Great, thank you, Grace. And someone has popped into the chat box the importance of some professional development for the settlement sector in terms of working with the CALD community around disability, and in particular young people. Before we move on, and thank you all, before we move on to the Q&A part of the session today, Dom, is there anything you want to add, given your particular role at NEDA, which is an organisation specifically focused on ethnic communities and disability?
Yes, a lot of these comments that people have made have hit the nail on the head. They have focused on a lot of the things that we have heard back from our members in all sorts of different communities. And one of the things that I think I struggle with myself is understanding access and equitable, knowing that you can have services available for you, but also knowing that for the purpose of the Royal Commission, service providers also create barriers for people, not always willingly, but sometimes out of sheer ignorance. And this is a form of what I call a form of violence, because it's a denial of people from culturally linguistic backgrounds with a disability to have the same access of support and services. And this also exacerbates stuff around stigma. It prolonged ideas around ableism, and also it creates kind of like a not knowing your rights. So if you're new to the country, you don't know what your rights are to having support, but you also need to know that the community services also need to promote that the services and rights that you are entitled to is about access. So as a Vietnamese person with a disability with cerebral palsy, my needs are no different to an Australian person with cerebral palsy. We have the equal rights to have support and and availability to access the community. But the problem is structurally, our disability support service system has came out of the disability rights movement, which in hence tended to be for Anglo-Australians with disabilities. So there's a lot of catch-up that needs to happen. And for young people with disability, I'd just like to just personally relate to the fact that as a male person with disabilities, the level of stigma and ableism that's promoted in Australian society, in our education system, promotes a lot of stuff about marginalisation and exclusion. So because I've got cerebral palsy, most Australian men, boys, they like to play sport. And sport is a main contributor to social cohesion, social interaction, bonding. But of course, if you have a disability like myself and I can't participate in basketball or play cricket or whatever, and growing up in a rural society that I did, so this question is also around the Disability Royal Commission engaging with cold communities in rural and remote areas, considering the government had promoted the idea of shared settlements, visa settlements into remote and regional areas. So the idea of disability supports in regional areas is also lacking. It kind of exacerbates the problem. So I'd just like to open up to anyone to ask questions to either Grace, Cindy, and Jessica and Shauna. Any questions around the Royal Commission that you feel that would be could put them on notice, basically speaking. Yes.
And thank you, Dom. And there's a few questions that people have posed in the chat box. So I'd really encourage you to raise them, you know, to our panelists. And if you can either raise your hand or pop your name in the chat box. And surely there are no questions.
I'm going to put it back on the Royal Commission, Jess and Shauna. What future work are you doing or aiming to do to get people, sorry to put Grace and Cindy on the spot, but basically what would you do to help promote and get Grace and Cindy or young lads like myself, to make a submission? What future work are you doing?
It's a great question, Dom. Thanks for representing the younger lads of the world. Our answer sort of reflects back on, I'm sorry, I can't remember who mentioned it. I think you're from South Australia, the Migrant Resource Centre, the fact that engagement within core communities is really challenging for government organisations because of the level of distrust and, you know, issues that people may have from, you know, the journey that they have taken to come to Australia in particular. We're very conscious of that. We're also conscious of the very short time frame that we have to work within. The Royal Commission will run until 2022, which doesn't really give us a lot of time to make the inroads into communities that, you know, something that a government program that might run for, you know, perpetuity. So we're relying very heavily on organisations like migrant resource centres and other large humanitarian service providers who can help us connect with particular communities and community members, and that also we would connect with people like Grace and Cindy who have lived experiences themselves and who as advocates maintain a space where they're able and comfortable in some situations at least to stand up and be heard and to share information. So basically we're trying to build bridges between community members and ourselves through organisations and advocates. Hopefully that goes some way to answering the question, but we're also planning to do some targeted work and for young people in particular that would involve potentially having specific meetings with organisations and service providers about the work that they do in these spaces and the gaps that they're experiencing, but also working with young people through organisations like MYAN and White Ass, and doing a co-design process so that young people feel like they're not just being put on the spot and asked to provide us with information, but that they're part of the process, and hopefully that goes some way to creating some sense of empowerment for young people, that, you know, they've been connected with other young people who have similar life experience to them, as well as, you know, helping us gather the information that we need to be able to create recommendations that will hopefully change things for the better in the future.
Yep, great. Thank you, Shauna. I think that's really clear, and conscious that this meeting today has come out of our engagement with the Royal Commission, with yourself and with Jess, around some co-design possibilities and the CALD engagement principles. And we really appreciate your willingness to engage with us around that work. There are a few questions which is fabulous. So we might go first to Jacqueline Rivera, and then Alex Long from MYAN New South Wales, and then Teresa Sally and Carol from Victoria. So Jacqueline, first up, over to you. Are you still with us, Jacqueline? Okay, well, I might throw to Alex, and if you're still with us, Jacqueline, please let me know in the chat box or pop your hand up. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Nadine. My question is around Grace and Cindy. Have there been examples of when you've engaged with a mainstream youth service where you've had a really positive experience, and what were the particular, I guess, kind of supports, or what were the reasons why that was a really positive experience for you?
That is a very good question. I guess mainstream, so specifically the mainstream youth sector.
Well, I guess a youth service that's not specifically a disability service. So any service that's not their specific area of expertise.
So I also do a lot of work with Headspace. I have accessed their service way back when, but I do a lot of stuff with them on their youth advisory group, and a lot of the stuff that comes out of there, mainly, I'm a bit biased, but a lot of the stuff that comes out of there based on the representation within the group has been very accessible and culturally diverse and culturally appropriate. Yeah, I think that's the main thing that comes to mind.
Grace, did you want to add anything?
I don't really think I can answer that particular question, because I don't think in terms of my disability I have accessed any support from youth services. I came to Australia quite a long time ago, and by the time these sort of supports started existing, I was already capable of managing my own disability and going and seeking the support that I needed in terms of like medical support and all of that. So yeah, I haven't really accessed any youth services.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Cindy. Jacqueline Rivera, you're up next. Okay, Jacqueline, I've got you on the list, but we might just throw next to Teresa Sally, and then we'll go to Carol Pondavile from Melbourne Polytechnic. So Teresa, and then we'll come back to you, Jacqueline. And Teresa, if you could pop your video on.
Yes, I have clicked on it, but it says you cannot start the video.
Okay, go ahead, Teresa. We can hear you loud and clear.
My question is mainly to Grace and Cindy, but anybody else who can think of the idea is that what strategies would they suggest to current mainstream services, or whether to be youth, to be able to reach the families and the young people with disability, including those who are approaching disability? Because to me, I'm a social worker and I work with the communities, especially from the African diverse communities, and there's a lot of, there's no access to services. So have being in that experience as you young people, which strategies do you think they would work to be able to access our small communities, especially with the limited English, the parents and the young people?
Great, thanks, Teresa. Grace or Cindy, would you like to answer that question? I think it probably is suitable for you guys specifically.
I think most of the time the focus from services leans on translating the information so it can be readable for those who English is a barrier. And that is great. The information does need to be translated, but there are also some languages that aren't accounted for. And I think if people can't read, they can be shown. And they can see it through examples of maybe role-playing some of the scenarios, and they can see and understand it that way as well. And I think that's something that's always missing. And also the fact that there are some words that don't exist in some of our languages, so it's very hard to translate that for someone to understand. So drama or role-playing is a really great way of showing storytelling in that way, to show what is a good way of engaging with someone from a CAL background, or what is a bad way of engaging, or what is a barrier for someone with a disability from a CAL background. You can put on different scenarios in that way to show those sorts of situations.
Yeah, amazing stuff. In my opinion, working within like the youth sector with Headspace and YDAS, I have been the biggest cheerleader for the youth participation model. So making sure you talk to young people about what services and supports that they want to see within the community. Just going off what I do with Headspace, they have for each of their centers, they generally have a youth advisory group that advises how the center should run to make it youth friendly and diverse and accessible to all young people, which I think can be applied to so many other sectors. Even at YDAS, they have a steering committee reviewing a lot of their policies and initiatives with a group of young people with disabilities, which again is so applicable for so many service providers and industries outside of so applicable for young people in the CALD community who do have disabilities.
Thank you, Cindy and Grace, and thanks, Teresa. I think it's a really critical question. I'm really conscious of...
Maybe we could add on not only young people and their families. So the family should also be included, please, if that is possible.
Yep, sure, got it. Yes, Teresa, it's a good point. And I think both Cindy and Grace talked about that earlier on, but it's an important point, Teresa. And I think, you know, good youth participation models will include a family aware approach as well. I think it's absolutely not either or, but often in practice, it ends up being either or. But I think good cross-cultural practice is absolutely not either or. And I know we heard that loud and clear from Cindy and Grace early on. Thanks, Teresa. Mindful of the time, I'm going to throw to Carol Pondavile and then to Marcia. And if Jacqueline, you still want to speak and are able to, it looked like there are a few tech problems, please raise your hand. I haven't forgotten about you. Carol, over to you. But you are on mute.
Sorry, now I'm not. Hi, everyone. Just some really great ideas there in particular. I mean, I'm an EAL teacher, and just hearing Grace in particular what you were sharing there, and then Cindy about the youth participation model in terms of producing resources, and you know, and just those role players you mentioned, Grace, just amazing. And they really, those sort of case studies and examples like that really hit home when talking to families. And I think, you know, I was wondering about, I guess this is a little bit aside, it's sort of on the side a little bit, but it's about supporting young people who are perhaps in a caring role. Just wondering about just any views regarding that, because in the AMEP, we know we've got some youth specific programs, and we've got quite a number of young people who hold, you know, those responsibilities at home, and how to support them better too.
Thanks, Carol. Cindy or Grace or Dom, in terms of Carol's question?
I'll go. Is that okay, Grace? Cindy? Yeah. Carol, I think what the balance is about information and empowerment. So I think particularly around this great thing called the NDIS, what's really needed to be known is that when it comes to getting support for your disability, it should be an empowering thing. It should be about liberating the family and the person and the individual, and it's understanding what that means. And I think a lot of the time there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of I can speak from my conversations that I've had with my friends, not my peers, but my friends in the COLD community, that in a caring capacity, is that there's so much expectation from the family members, the aunties, uncles, about culturally what that means to be in a caring role. There's so much expectation from the school and the education and the job and getting a job and balancing work, and there need to be more understanding within the employment market and HR that people diversities, we need. We talk about the great thing about flexible workplaces, and that needs to kind of be part and parcel of how our disabilities and impairments work, and how they work in the home and within the community. And so the NDIS ideally, and other support provided by federal government and state government and even local government, is that it needs to be acknowledged that for all of us in the communities and communities, that this support is really about improving one's lifestyle, one's place of being, and also improving one's capacity to live as individuals, not separate to the community and the family, but as individuals themselves to reach their biggest potential. For example, this is a very, very simple example. I'm on the NDIS. I had to self-advocate to myself because my family doesn't really understand anything about the NDIS, and they're white, but that doesn't matter. But this assistive technology, I've been able to access Zoom. I can access I can listen to music for the first time in my life, and all these sort of other benefits. I can watch movies properly with the surround sound and all this sort of thing. So it's about this kind of understanding that the services, all social system services, it's not just about the individual being empowered, but it's also about the individual having control of that power to be empowered. And that kind of need to be better put out into the community through our translation materials, through our our engagement work with carers and Grace and Cindy's families around they need to be empowered with that knowledge as well. That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah, just to go off what Dom has spoken about, and to give more of a youth CALD perspective, young people within the CALD community are placed under a lot of pressure within their household. Even young people who don't have a disability in the CALD community are often have a lot of responsibility just based on kind of cultural norms, and to have that added kind of pressure of a caregiving role, even if the person they're caring for is on an NDIS plan. A lot of kind of like informal support does come from that young person, and the pressure to succeed in that role is quite large. And also to give a spin on it, that responsibility in a young person with a disability in the CALD community is kind of it plays out in two ways in my experience. It's either your parents have kind of given up on you in succeeding, or have placed great pressure on you to succeed because they don't kind of see an alternative future.
Just to add to that, I also see those who are carers for people with disabilities, or young people who are supporting their families who may not be able to understand English very well, as people who are hidden as well, because in our cultures, it's that, oh, if you are the oldest child, it's your responsibility to look after your parents when they get older. Or if you're the oldest child and you have a sibling that has a disability, it's your responsibility to look after your siblings as well, and support your parents in looking after your siblings. So we see it as a family duty. Therefore, there's no need to seek support, because it's the role that we are naturally supposed to take on. So in asking for support, you see it as, oh, but I failed my role, as in this is within our family, this is what I'm supposed to be doing as the oldest child, or as a child looking after their parents. And I think just a space needs to be created for those who are carers, or just young people in general who are in a role of supporting families in Australia, for them to be able to speak up about what type of support they need, because it'd be best to come from that. But I think just to sort of give you an answer of some sort, probably it's that we need to be able to see what the resources are, what the avenues are to seek support, and that's not often out there or in spaces that we can see it, or translated or written in language that we can understand. It's always very academic or very formal. Yeah, so I think just finding ways to put those resources in spaces where people who need it can see it, and using simple language to explain what the support is.
Thanks, Grace and Cindy. And Dom, they're really comprehensive responses. And thanks also, Carol, for your question, because it did sort of shift a bit of focus onto carers, which we did want to look at today. I'm really conscious of time. We're already 5 minutes over. I'm going to boldly, and I know a few people need to leave, but because you've been waiting a while, I'm just going to throw to two last questions to Mercia and to Jude. You've been waiting a while, so first to Mercia, then to Jude, and then we'll wrap up, and we will certainly be wrapped up by 1. So if you can keep your questions as brief as you can, thank you.
I'm really sorry, I'm conscious of the time as well, but it is a very important topic for all of us. So definitely. Just a quick comment just before I make the question back to Teresa about her question of how we engage with isolated communities. We've had those experiences here in Adelaide. Because of the stigma, you often cannot access people with disabilities, because families often tend to keep them away, and especially in those minor communities where they're not very big communities. But one way and strategies that we have used to access those communities is by engaging in their own community events. So we are very lucky to have received some funding through IOC, and it has been very, very helpful. So engaging with the communities, being part of them through their own community events, not inviting someone to a disability information session, they're not going to show up because of the stigma. Then everyone would know I have some member of the family with a disability. So be part of them, be part of those community activities, engage with them. That's how you actually access those very isolated communities and small communities. And just a quick question now for Grace and Cindy. I was just wondering if support coordination is a very important part of every young CULT person to be part of their NDIS plan, since they have to advocate for themselves from a younger age, knowing that parents don't speak the English. Do they need that direct link and support that could make their life much better advocating for themselves? Thank you.
I can start off if that's okay, Grace. I say yes, 100%. Even like when I was younger, I kind of fumbled my way around and kind of was like led in directions that looking back, I probably would have not have taken if I fully understood what kind of direction I was going in. And it would have been very useful to have someone on my side saying yes, no to things that I needed or didn't need. But even now, me going onto the NDIS plan quite recently, I don't know what I'm doing, and having kind of culturally appropriate supports available and knowing where to look for them is very difficult because there is such a wide variety of supports, and just having that help on your side, especially if you are advocating for yourself, it just produces better outcomes for the person with the disability.
I totally agree. Yeah, that type of support would needs to be there right from the beginning. As a person who started advocating for themselves really late in terms of what type of support they need for their disability, and I remember specifically when the first time I said to my mom, "No, I can go to my appointment on my own. I know what I need to say to my doctor, and what I need to support me." That was very empowering in itself. And it was just very sad for me that it took so long to get to that point, because I didn't have the proper support around me to guide me to have self-agency and advocate for myself and what I need. So yeah, it's definitely needed right from the start.
Thanks, Grace. Jude, I know you've been waiting to ask a question. We have about 1 minute for your question because our wonderful Auslan interpreters, Philip and Chelsea, need to finish at 1. So if your question is quick, Jude, please go ahead. You're on mute.
Thank you. It really has been an honour to be a part of this conversation. My question is to Dom. Dom, what do you do in your daily activities to live well at home, in the community, and at work?
I'll be put on the spot. I just exist as I do, as I feel confident in doing. I'm fairly independent, but I'm also aware there's a lot of people who are non-verbal and are required a lot of support to get out and about in the community. So I just, I'm relatively okay in the sense of being able to get out and about, but I'm also mindful that my disability is getting worse. So there's temperance around that sort of stuff. And recognizing that I will need to ask for support, and asking for support is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. So yeah. So I think that question probably be better put towards Grace and Cindy, in terms of what are the youth networks? What are the youth networks that are for people with young people with disabilities? So um I'm also over age. I'm 45. So.
Grace and Cindy, thank you, Dom. Grace and Cindy, can you answer it in about 30 seconds?
I'm lucky enough that the things that I do participate in my daily life isn't impeded in any like big or significant way. So I generally am able to do most of the things that I want to do. However, I am aware that I am only one voice in a wide variety of voices.
Grace, anything to add?
I've only just stepped into speaking up about my disability and barriers and challenges other people with disabilities might be facing. So I'm keen to continue in that journey and to continue to, I guess, feel empowered by other young people who are going through similar situations or experiencing the same things in order to keep sharing and speaking up and sharing our collective struggles.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jude. Thanks, guys. And that's a really lovely note to finish on. We've run over by about 15 minutes. And before I hand over to Dom for some formal wrap up, I will say that I think we've certainly seen with the interest and all the questions that we didn't get through, that people are very keen to engage around this topic, and certainly we've loved hearing from you, Cindy and Grace, and certainly from MYAN side, we really appreciate your willingness and your openness and honesty about talking about your experiences in all their complexity, and helping all of us navigate through what is a complex space with a lot more work to do. I think that's really clear from our side. So certainly from MYAN's perspective, we'll chat with NEDA after the meeting, and it may be that we convene another similar meeting. I think the need is very obvious, and there's a lot of great comments flowing in the chat box. Over to you, Dom.
As a wrap up, I'd just like to say a big, massive thank you on behalf of NEDA and MYAN, and I want to say, Grace and Cindy, thank you so much for putting your literally your life on the line, so to speak. And I'd like to say thank you for Jess and Shauna for sharing, and Fiona from your story. Those resources will be available online, and NEDA has also got some translated fact sheets, and we got some information about your story legal service. We just like to say that we're going to have we'll get notes from this, and this will form our joint submission into the Royal Commission. And we will like to look forward, maybe have a youth only. So I might be stepping out of that, but a youth only group in the future, and we would love the Royal Commission to be part of that as a way of engaging with young people with a disability and strictly talking to young people themselves. And I would like to follow up this question lastly, and I would love to find out some information from, and I'm sure Jesse and Shauna would, is what are your thoughts, Grace and Cindy, later, we can discuss this later, on how to get the Royal Commission to engage with those young people from whole background with a disability who are non-verbal and have high needs, because this is, we're pretty good because we're advocates ourselves, we're verbal, but I would love to have your thoughts later on how the Royal Commission should engage with other young people who are not so vocal, so to speak. So I'd like to say thank you, and on behalf of MYAN and NEDA, and thank you very much for today. And everyone comment in the chat has been absolutely awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dom, and thank you to Chelsea and Philip. Quite a task with this many people on our Auslan interpreters. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Right.
You're on mute, Andrew.
Oh, I was gonna say, you can turn on your video for the last moment if you like, just to capture some people on screen.
Great.
Just because I know it's such a great, it's the biggest turnout we've had for any meeting actually, which is amazing to see. So I think it's a great thing to show how important this this topic is. So I think it's a nice thing just to see everyone's faces, even for a split second, which you might be able to share or however. But yeah, thank you everyone. Yeah.
Did you take a screenshot, Andrew?
Yeah, the meeting's recorded.
To do that, the meeting's recorded.
So it's all fine. Yeah.
Wonderful.
All good. All right.
Thank you, Andrew, for that prompt. Really great to have you all here.
Thank you. Bye.